Hey everyone, welcome back to our Angular 19 tutorial series. And so far we have covered the essentials of Angular, including data binding, directives, routings, forms, etc. And in our last video, we explored services and dependency injection, a fundamental concept in Angular. Now we are going to put these fundamentals into practice by exploring CRUD operations. We will be working with get, put, post, and delete API methods. And if you are not familiar with services and dependency injection, I recommend watching our previous video before moving forward. So what does CRUD mean? CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete operations. And these fundamental operations require data, which is typically retrieved through APIs. Earlier, while learning about services, we used a dummy API from JSON placeholder for demonstration purposes. And for practice, you can visit bceptor.com, which offers free backend APIs for testing and development. On this platform, you will find a wide range of APIs, including GitHub, JSON placeholder, e-commerce API, fake API, and many more. And apart from using existing APIs, we can create our own API using JSON Server. So today, we will also learn how to use JSON Server in Angular. So let's set up JSON Server first. And this process involves three steps. First, install JSON Server using command npm install -g space JSON-server @0. And this @0 flag ensures that you install the stable version of JSON Server. It automatically generates IDs in integer format when you add new data to the database. Enter. And note that if you install JSON Server without the @0 flag, IDs may be generated in hexadecimal format instead of integers. So this is our first step. Now next step is to create a new file with a .json extension at the root level. For example, here let's create a file named db.json, and we will add some sample data to this file. And especially we will create a users array within the object users array. And inside this array, I'll add individual user objects like id :1, name :shivam, username :shivam, and email shivam@gmail.com. This is how I'll create two more users. Okay, so this is how I have added three user objects inside this users array. And with this, we have completed the first two steps. Now, let's move on to the third step, that is running the JSON server. And to do this, use the command JSON-server space --watch space file name db.json. Hit enter. This will start the JSON server and provide us with API endpoints such as localhost :3000/users. Notice that the endpoint includes the name of the array we created in the database file, which is users. And if we navigate to this URL, we will see the data which I have added to the db.json file. Okay, so with this, we have completed setting up our JSON server. And now we have a fundamental endpoint URLs with data. And this means our backend is ready. And now let's shift our focus to the Angular side. So in this terminal, our JSON server is running. And this first terminal, our Angular project is running. Okay. So let me open one more terminal. And as we have already learned that services plays a crucial role in managing database connections and to maintain clean and organized code. So instead of mixing component logic and database code in the same file, it's better to create a service and keep all database related code within that service file. So I'll start by creating a new service using the command ng generate service as for service and service name CRUD. Enter. And this command will create two files. One is .ts file and one is spec.ts file. We will focus on .ts file. And also we learnt when working with dependency injection, we follow a specific architecture for making HTTP request. We create a service that sends an HTTP GET request to the database, and then the database responds with data in the form of an observable. And to retrieve this data, component needs to subscribe to the observable. And once subscribed, component can access all necessary data from the service, right? So let's begin with the GET API call. So inside this service file, we will send an HTTP GET request to the database. For that, first I'll inject the HTTP client service through the constructor. Private HTTP:/HTTP client. And for best practice, let's store the endpoint URL in a variable called base URL of type string equals to, I'll paste our endpoint URL. Now, before making the HTTP GET call, let's create an interface using command generate interface name iUser. For clarity, I have used the prefix I to indicate it's an interface, but you can choose any name that you like. Now, inside the iUser interface, we will add properties for the users. So here, let me add ID of type number, name of type string, and username of type string, and last email of type string. Okay, so this interface will help us to define the structure of the user data that we will receive from the API. So whatever properties you have in the API, ID, name, username, email, that you have to add inside the interface with their data types. Now let's jump into service file, and here I'll create a method called getData. And within this method, we will return an HTTP GET call request using http.get. So this .http.get, and inside the parenthesis, here you can see we need to provide the URL of type string. And we have stored our endpoint URL in base URL variable. And since we have created the iUser interface, we will define the data type as iUser and square bracket. These square brackets indicate an array of user objects. Okay. So this is how we have sent an HTTP GET request to the database from the service file. Now next, I'll create a new component called ng-generate component name CRUD. And let's add the root for this CRUD component inside app.routes.ts. So let me search app.routes.ts file. And here I'll add one more object for CRUD, and the corresponding component name is CRUD component. And also inside app.component.html file, I'll add a link for this CRUD component. So here, let me copy paste the link, and the last link is for CRUD. And here, let me change the name to CRUD or CRUD operations. Now save the changes and let's open the browser on localhost 4200. Let me minimize this page, and here you can see the CRUD operations in the navbar list. So let me navigate to this CRUD operation component, and we can see the CRUD component loaded on the browser. Now in this CRUD component, we will display the list of users. And since the data is available in our CRUD service file in the form of an observable. And as per HTTP service architecture, in order to fetch the observable form data, the component needs to subscribe to that method. So let me open the CRUD component.ts file, and here first we need to inject the CRUD service through construct. So here private CRUD CRUD service. After that, I'll create new method called getAllData, and inside this method, let's subscribe to the CRUD service method. And how we can access CRUD service? With the help of local variable CRUD. So this dot CRUD dot getData method dot subscribe. And to handle the response, we will use a fat arrow function and store the response in the local variable called API data of type IUserInterface square bracket equals to empty array. Now let me store the response in local variable, that is API data equals to response. Okay, so by doing this, now we are holding the user list inside this API data variable. But to load this list of users on page load, we will call this getAllData method inside ngOnInit lifecycle hook. And to use this method, we need to implement onInit. So here implements onInit, and then we need to define method inside class with ng prefix, ngOnInit, and then I'll call getAllData method inside this ngOnInit. Now let me open the browser, and here I'll open developer tool, and let's add a debugger to see if the data is being assigned to the API data variable or not. And to do this, I'll open crud.component.ts file in the sources tab. And here I'll add breakpoints after this subscribe. Now I'll refresh the page, and once I over to this response, we can see the list of users. And if I press F10 and over to this API data, and the data is now available in the API data variable. Okay, so now we have data inside our CRUD component TS file. So next, we need to display this data in the browser by adding API data to the HTML file. So inside HTML file, let's create a table and populate this table with API data. Let me take one div with class container, and I'll add heading with class text center dot margin 4, and I'll give heading Angular 19 CRUD operations with JSON server. And after this heading, I'll add table with class table dot table success and table stripped. And inside this table, I'll add thead and then tr, and inside tr I'll add th. This th for id, second is for name, third is for username, and fourth is for email. And after this thead, I'll add tbody. Again tr and then td. Now inside this tr, we need to iterate data over the API data variable. So here I'll use the ng_for directive, star ng_for equals to let data of API data. And for this ng_for, we need to import the common module or ng_for module inside the imports array of same component. So here let me common modules. Now save the changes, and inside HTML file, I'll bind this table data with API data. So using string interpolation, here I'll bind data.id, and this is for data.name, data.username, last data.email. Okay, save the changes, and let's go back to browser, and here you can see all three users listed in the table. So let's recap what we have done so far. We set up the JSON server, then added dummy data inside this db.json file, and after that established the HTTP connection with database from this service file. And next, in our CRUD component, we subscribe to the service method to retrieve data here and bound it to the template file. And one more thing, To make this HTTP connection, we had to add provide HTTP clients to the providers array of app.config.ts file. Here you can see we have added when learning about services. Without this, we can't establish the HTTP connection with database. Okay. So previously, we made an HTTP GET call using the JSON placeholder user API while learning about services. And this time we made the same HTTP GET call using the JSON server. And now with this user list, we will perform CRUD operations such as create, read, update, and delete. And to understand each operation clearly, I'll create separate component for each one. Specifically, I'll create an add user component for creating a new user, ng generate component, add user. Next, I'll create a view user component for reading the user. And last, I'll create update user component for updating a user. Okay, I have created 3 separate components for create, read, and update. And also I'll add routes for these 3 components in app.routes.ts file. So after this CRUD, I'll write the path add user, and for this component will be add user component. Next, update user. For this component will be update user. And last, view user. Component for view user is view user component. Okay. So for this CRUD operation, we have created 4 components and we have added the 4 routes for all 4 components. Now let's move forward with the first operation, which is creating a new user. And for that, we have already created a add user component. So in the CRUD component template file, I'll create a new button called add user component. Button.btn.btn info, and I'll add the one more class margin 2. And the button name is add new user. And when this button is clicked, it will call add new user function. Okay, next I'll define the same function inside the TS file of same component. And when the add new user function is called, I want to navigate to the add user component. And to achieve this, we will use the routers navigate or navigate by URL method. And to use routers method, first we need to inject the router through constructor. Private router :route. Now inside this add new user method, I'll call the router dot navigate by URL method and pass the routes inside this parenthesis. And what path we have added for add user? This path we have added. So I'll paste this path here. Okay. So this navigate by URL method allows us to navigate from one component to another component. And if you need to pass extra parameters with the route, such as ID or status or anything, we would use the navigate method instead of navigate by URL method. We'll see that when updating the user. Now let's test this. Let me click on this add, and as you can see, we are navigating to the add user component. Now to add a new user, let's create a reactive form within this app user component. So let me close this interface, and now let me open the add user component template file and class file. Inside template file, let's create a form. I'll take div with class container. After that, I'll add form. Then I'll add heading with class text center and margin 4. And I'll add heading add user. After that, I'll add first field div with class form group and margin 3. Inside this div, I'll add one label with class form label. And the field name is name. Then after this label, I'll take one input box with class form control. And placeholder for this input is enter the name. Now I'll copy paste the same field 2 more times. The second field is for username. Placeholder will be enter the username. Third field for email. The placeholder will be enter the email. Okay, save the changes and have a look in the browser. Okay, let me add few more Bootstrap classes. Width 75, margin top 5, and MX auto means horizontally center. Sorry, I am adding this classes to the heading. Instead of heading, I need to add it to the form. Class equals to width 75, margin top, margin X auto, and PG color info. Also, I'll add padding 5. Okay, and hopefully I have added same color to the add new user button. Yes, button info, and here background info. Now last, let me add two buttons inside div with class text center and margin 3. Inside this div, I'll add button dot btn dot btn success. So I'll add one more class btn lg for large, and margin 1. And the button name is add. And I'll add one more button for cancel. For cancel, I'll change the button color to danger. Now on click of this cancel, I'll add one click event equals to, I'll add the function name on cancel. Now let's define the same function in the TS file. And when this cancel button is clicked, I want to redirect back to the CRUD component. So let me inject the router first through constructor private router :router. Now inside this onCancel method, I'll call routers navigate by URL method. Inside this, I'll provide the path CRUD. Okay. Now on click of this cancel button, we are redirecting to the CRUD component. So we have created the basic form inside the add user component. Now to make this form reactive, I need to import reactive forms module inside the imports array. And next, let's create the form group instance. So for that, I'll create a variable called add user form of type form group. And to initialize it, I'll use form builder service. So let me inject form builder private fb :form builder. And now I'll assign the result of form builder to this add user form variable. Like here, add user form equals to this dot fb dot group unexpected token, a constructor method. Okay. We need to write this code inside constructor. Okay. So here I have assigned the result of form builder dot group to this add user form variable. Now inside this, let's add the form control instances. And each form field need its own form control. So for this add user form, I'll add 3 form controls. First is for name, second is for username, and third is for email. And I'll pass an initial value to each form control as a string. Okay. Now we have both the form template as well as the form instance. So now we need to connect them. And to do this, we will use form group directive. Inside square bracket, I'll write form group equals to, we need to bind this to our form instance, that is add user form. Okay. Next, each form field correspond to a form control. So in order to link this form field with form control, we can use form control name attribute to each field. So here, let me add form control name equals to name. Let's add this attribute to rest two fields as well. This is for username and last for email. Now last we need to handle the form submission. And for that we will call onSubmit function using the ngSubmit directive. ngSubmit equals to onSubmit. And finally, let's define this onSubmit method inside TS file. And this method will return an object with a value properties. So let's add console.log, and inside this I'll add this dot add user form dot value. Save the changes and let's test our form. And we are getting an error, can't bind to form group since it is not a known property of form. We have provided the type of add user form is form group. We have imported reactive forms component. Instead of this, we need to import reactive forms module. Sorry for this. Now save the changes and let me open developer tool. Now let me add some data into this add user form. Let's add Vishal, username also Vishal and email ID vishal@gmail.com. And when I click on the add button, you can see an object logged to the console with the values we entered. Now next we want to send these same values to our JSON server. And to add data to the server, we will use post method. So in our service file, let's create a new method called postDate. And this method will take our form data, which is of type iUser. That is our interface. And then we can send this data to our endpoint URL. Okay, so inside this method, let me return this .http.post, and inside parenthesis, here you can see this method expect two parameters. One is URL of type string and second parameter is body or form data. So here, let me add base URL, comma, date. Now save the changes and go inside add user components.ts file and let's subscribe to the post data method inside onSubmit method. Before that, we need to create an instance of CRUD service here. For that, we need to inject CRUD service through constructor. Private CRUD of type CRUD service. Now we can access the CRUD service methods. So here CRUD dot post data, and here I'll pass data as add user form dot value dot subscribe, and inside the parenthesis again I'll use fat arrow function, and once the data is successfully posted, I want to navigate back to the CRUD component. So here let me call the router method router dot navigate by URL, and inside that I'll pass the CRUD component path. Now let's test everything by adding a new user data. Let me add another data here, Vivek, and then vivek@gmail.com. Now once I click on add button, the application will redirect to the CRUD component and we can see the fourth user added in the table. Also we can refresh this endpoint URL. Here also you can see the user which we have added few seconds before. Okay, so we have successfully implemented get and post API call, and hopefully this explanation has helped you to understand the process clearly. Now let's move on to the third API call, which is put. Let me comment out this console. And so far we have used get method to fetch data from the API, and then we have used post method to send new data to the API, and now we are using put method to update existing data in the API. Okay, so to demonstrate the put API call, first let's create a scenario. inside CRUD component.html file for update, view, and delete operation. Let me add three more th here. One is for update, next is for view, and last is for delete. Next, I'll add corresponding data in three table cells inside this T body. Inside TD, I'll add one button, button.btn.btn warning. Also, I'll add one more class, btn small, and margin 1. And this button is for update the user. Same button I'll add for view and delete. For view, I'll change the button color to secondary, btn secondary. This is btn hyphen warning, and this is btn hyphen danger. Save the changes and let's have a look in the browser. Let me add few classes to this t head. Class equals to call2. And for email, I'll change it to 3. And now for these three buttons, I'll add call1. Yeah, now it looks good. Okay, so I have added three buttons, but first we will focus on update functionality. So let me add a click event into this update button. Click equals to on update. Now let's define this on update method inside the TS file of CRUD component. And on click of this function, it will redirect us to the update user component. So let me call the router method again, router.navigate by URL, and inside this, I'll pass the path for update user. We'll just copy paste the same path to avoid the spelling mistakes. Now let's test in the browser. If I click on the update button, I am redirecting to the update user component. But inside this update component, we are unclear which specific user we want to update, right? So to solve this, we have added an update button for each record. So when I click on one of these buttons, I want to update the corresponding user record. But how do we identify the specific record to update? We can do this using the primary key, which is the user ID, right? So this 1, 2, 3, 4. And to achieve this, let's modify the route first. So inside this route.ts file, we need to include the ID parameter after this update user path. So we need to add forward slash, then colon and ID. And this ID we will take from the user table data, right? So I'll again go back to CRUD component.html file. And here let me pass data.id. We are getting all the user data inside this API data. And using ng for directive, we are accessing whole API data using data variable. So I have passed data.id as a parameter to this onUpdate method. And when we click on this update button, we need to pass the ID along with the route. So here, let me modify this onUpdate method. Now it will accept ID parameter, which is of type number. And when navigating to the update user component, we will use the navigate method instead of navigate by URL. Because here we need to pass the ID along with the update user in the array. So let me add square bracket here. After route, I can pass ID. So hope you understand the difference between navigate by URL method and navigate method of route. If you need to pass extra parameter along with route, we should use navigate method. And if you only need to pass the route, then we should use navigate by URL method. Now let's test this. If I click on fourth user update button, you can see the ID in the URL. Okay. Now if I click on second user, you can see the respective ID in the URL. So now we can fetch the user record correspond to this ID. And to do this, let's create a new method in the service file. Let me open CRUD service. And here I'll create new method. called getDataById. And this method will take one parameter of type number. And inside this method, I'll again send the HTTP GET request to the database, requesting only the record with the matching ID. http.get of type IUser, and inside parenthesis, I need to append ID to the endpoint URL. This dot base URL slash $ID. So by doing this, we are expecting only one user record correspond to this ID from the database. Now to retrieve the user record from this getDataById method, the component needs to subscribe this method. And which component requires the user record? The update component requires user data. So let me open the update user component.ts file. And from this file, we need to subscribe to the getDataById method. So here, first I need to inject the service through constructor private CRUD of type CRUD service. And then instead of creating new method, I'll add code inside onInit lifecycle hook. For that, I need to implement onInit and then need to define ng onInit lifecycle hook. And inside that, let me subscribe the service method CRUD dot getDataById. And here you can see this method expects one parameter ID which is of type number. So we need to pass ID in order to subscribe this method. And we receive this ID from the CRUD component through the URL that we have already seen. Before subscribing to this method, we need to fetch ID from the URL. And to fetch ID from URL in Angular, we can use activated route service. And in order to use any service, first we need to inject it. So private active route of type activated route. After this, I'll create a new property called user ID with a type of object that has a property called UID, which is of type number. And then inside ng onInit lifecycle hook, we will assign the value to this UID property. So let me access the user ID with this keyword, this dot user ID equals to inside curly brackets UID colon. Now I'll access the activated route. Activate route dot snapshot property dot params. First, let me write syntax and then I'll explain. Inside square bracket ID. Now I'll explain this line. So this active route which provides information about the current route. And next, snapshot. This is the property of activated route that provides a snapshot of current routes parameter. And params is the property of snapshot that contains an object with the routes parameter. And this ID is accessing the value of the ID parameter from the routes parameter. Now let's log the ID to verify its value. So inside user ID dot UID. Let's test in the browser. Let me go inside CRUD operation and I'll open developer tool. Let me clear the console. And if I click on the first user update button, we are receiving the same ID from the URL, right? If I click on the another record, like third record, I'll receive the corresponding ID in the console. So now we are getting ID in user ID.uid. So let's subscribe to this method now. So I'll pass the parameter user ID.uid to this getDataById method. Dot subscribe, and inside parenthesis, again we need to handle the response using fat arrow function. And I'll store the result in local variable called user data of type any. So I'll store the response in user data equals to response. Now save the changes and let me open browser. And here I'll go inside sources. Let me open the update user component.ts file. And now I'll add debugger to this line number 29. Let me go inside CRUD operations and I'll click on this fourth user. And if I over to this response, we can see the user's information. If I click on F10, now you can see the respective user data is available in our local variable user data. Now next, let's display this record in the browser using the update component template file. I'll go inside update component template file, and here you can choose to display the data in a table or a form depending on your preference or requirement. For this example, I'll use the form, the same one we used to add a new user. So let me copy the complete form from the add user component template file and paste it into the update user component template file. And here I'll just change the form name to update user and the heading to update user. And after that, I'll change the button to update, and everything else remains the same. Now next, let's define the on submit and on cancel method in the TS file. So I'll copy the on cancel button from add user component and I'll paste it inside update user. Here we need to inject the router, private router of type router. And next, we need to define the on submit method. Now inside this on submit method, we need to send the updated data to the server. But before that, we need to create an instance of this form using the form builder service. So let me copy the relevant code from the add user component class file and paste it inside update user component class file inside constructor. And I need to inject form builder, private FB of type form builder. And also we need to create update user form variable of type form group. Let me paste the same name to this line number 16. And additionally, here we need to pass ID. Okay. After that, we're getting so many errors. Okay, here I have added extra curly bracket. Now our update user form is also ready and we have created the instance of that form. And we are getting the user record inside this user data variable. So let's populate this form with the user data values. And as we have discussed earlier while learning about Angular forms, to set form field data, we should use the set value method. So here I'll use set value method to set the user data in the update user form. So let me write update user form dot set value. Inside parenthesis, I'll add curly braces and now I'll set the value to each form control. So ID colon user data dot ID comma name colon user data dot name comma username colon user data dot username, and last email colon user data dot email. Save the changes and let's have a look into the browser. Again, we are getting the same error that we need to import the reactive forms module inside the imports array. And now you can see the user data is populated in the respective fields. And also we can update the data. But after updating this data, we need to send it to the database. And to do this, we need to send an HTTP put request from service file to database, right? So I'll go inside service and I'll copy paste the get data by ID method and I'll modify the method name. Instead of get, I'll write put data by ID and I'll pass the updated data to the endpoint URL along with ID. Instead of any, I can use iUser interface. And here, instead of get, I need to write put. And here you can see this put method expect two parameters. One is URL of type string and another is data. So after this, I'll add comma and pass data. Now save the changes and let's go back to update user component.ts file, and inside on submit method, we will subscribe to the put data by ID method. So let me access the service with local variable CRUD dot put data by ID, and here we need to pass two parameter, that is user ID dot uid and update user form dot value, right? After that, we need to subscribe to this method and then we need to handle the response. I'll use fat arrow function. And after successfully updating the data, I want to navigate back to the CRUD component. Right, so I'll copy the same line and paste it here. Okay, so with this, we have done the coding part of this update operation. Let's recap what we have done so far. So by adding ID in the route, we are getting respective ID in the route's URL. So we have fetched the ID from the route URL using the activated route service. Then we sent an HTTP GET request to the database to retrieve the specific user's data. After that, we have created a reactive form and populated the data in the browser using the set value method. Then we sent an HTTP put request from the service to update the data in the database. And then the update user component subscribed to that put method. Now let's test the update functionality end to end. I'll reload the user list and I'll click on the update button of the first user record, and we are not getting the selected user data. Let me retest. Here we have added set values. We are getting response and user data and okay. I need to set the value after this response. Okay. Now save the changes and let me go back to the browser here. Okay. Let me click on cancel button and now again I'll click on the update button, and this time it redirects me to the update user component with the selected user data, right? Now I'll update the data. Instead of Shivam, I'll write just Shiva. Okay, and shiva@gmail.com. Now I'll click on the update button and you can see the updated data in the table. And if I update some data here, for example, Ganesha 123456, and then click on the cancel button, it will redirect me to the CRUD component without updating the user data. Okay, so everything is working as expected so far. And with this, we have completed the create and update functionality. Now, let's quickly finish the read functionality. And we have already created a view button to each user record. So let's add click event to this. So let me go inside CRUD component and here I'll add click event equals to I'll assign function on view. And let's define the on view function in the TS file of CRUD component. And inside this function, I'll write the code to navigate to the view user component, router.navigate. And similar to the update user functionality, ID in the root as well as in the function parameter. So here also I'll pass data.id and here I'll pass ID of type number. And instead of using navigate by URL, I'll use navigate method. Our path name is give user, comma, ID. Save the changes and let me click on view button and I'm redirecting to the view component. Okay. Now let me open view user component template file and class file. And here also we are getting the respective ID inside routes parameter. And to access the route parameter, we will use activated route service. Let me open update user component and I'll copy the same code for accessing the route parameter. And I'll paste this inside the view component class file. Let me close this app route file and open the update user component.ts file. We'll copy the same constructor from here and paste it inside view user component. Let me import this service, activated route, then router, and last form builder. We don't need form builder for this view user component, so I'll not import this. Okay. Let me delete this set value method. And here also we need to subscribe to the get data by ID method to access the data from the service file. And since we have already covered this coding part a few minutes ago, so I'll reuse the existing code and move on quickly. Okay, so that is it we need to do inside the TS file. Let me go inside HTML file to bind the user data values in the template file. Okay, since we are getting data inside this user data variable, so we need to bind this user data values to the template file. And here I'll use few HTML tags and Bootstrap classes to do this. So let me add a div with class container, and inside this I'll add one more div with class width 50, adding 5, and then I'll add margin top 5, MX auto, and that's it. We'll see later. Next, I'll add heading with class text center and margin 4. The heading is view user. Then I'll take one more div, and inside this div, I'll add paragraph for name, and for value, I'll add b tag with class text info, and here we can bind the value of user data dot name. Now I'll copy the same paragraph and paste it 2 more times. Second paragraph is username and third paragraph is for email. User data dot username, user data dot email. And after this div, I'll add one button with class ptn dot ptn success. The button name is close. I'll add click event to this button, and the function name is onClose. Let me define the same function inside TS file, and on click of this button, I want to redirect to the CRUD component. So let me call the router method router dot navigate by URL, and inside parenthesis, I'll pass the path, that is CRUD. Now let's have a look into browser. Okay. If I click on close button, I'm redirecting back to the CRUD component. Okay, the view button is in gray color. So let me add one more class to this div, bg secondary, and text white. Save the changes and let me click on the view button. And now we can see the div user component in gray background. But we are getting an error, cannot read property of undefined. Okay, let me add here question mark. Save the changes, close. Let me click on view button, and everything is working as expected. Okay, when I click on the close button, I return to the users list table in the CRUD component. And when I click on the view button, I am redirecting to the view user component where I can read the user data. So now we have completed everything except the delete functionality, and which is actually very simple. All we need to do is open the CRUD component.html file and add the click event to the delete button equals to on delete, and we need to pass the ID through this function data.id. Now let's define the same function inside TS file with parameter ID of type number. And inside this function, we need to call the service method to delete the specific user record. So let me open the CRUD service file. And inside this service, in order to delete the data, we need to send an HTTP delete request to the database. So let me create new method called delete data with parameter ID, which is of type number. And inside this method, let's return the this.http.delete And inside parenthesis, we need to pass base URL along with ID. That's it. Now let's subscribe to this delete data method from the CRUD component TS file. And now let's subscribe to the delete data method. CRUD data, we need to pass ID. After that, subscribe, and then response. And once the data is deleted, I'll reload the user list by calling the get all data method. Save the changes and let's open the browser and let me click on the delete button. And as you can see, the record is deleted successfully and the remaining user list is reloaded. And we can also display a message to the user such as the confirmation alert or prompt to let them know the deletion was successful. Like here, let me add one alert with message record deleted successfully. And after this alert, we need to reload the remaining users on the browser. Now save the changes and let me revisit the browser and let's test by clicking the delete button. And this time I receive an alert with message record deleted successfully. And once I click the OK button, the remaining user list is displayed in the browser. Okay, so this is how you can add this type of alert after creating, updating, or deleting a user record to provide confirmation to the user. And with this, we have covered all 4 CRUD operations, which includes get, post, put, and delete API calls. We have used get method to retrieve data from the API, and we have used post method to add new data to the API, and we have used put method to update existing data to the API. And last, we have used a delete method to remove data from the API. Now last, let's test the CRUD operation functionality from start to finish. I'll reload the page on localhost 4200. Let me navigate to the CRUD operation component. And first I'll add new user by clicking on this add new user button. Let me add the values in each field. FED learning, username is FED, email ID is fedlearning24@gmail.com. Now I'll click on add button. And as you can see, the third record is added to the table. Now let me click on the update button. And if I update the fields, FED learning, and here I'll add hyphen and then click on the update button. And as you can see, the update functionality is also working as expected. Now let me click on view button and we can read the respective user data. Let me click on close button and I'll navigate to the CRUD component. And finally, delete the user. Let me click on this delete button and I'm getting one alert. And once I click on OK, the record is deleted. Okay, so everything is working as expected. And if you observed, we have utilized most of the Angular's fundamental building blocks, including components, routing, directives, data binding, reactive forms, services, and dependency injection throughout this CRUD operation example. And if you need further clarification on any of these concepts, please review them individually. So I hope you found this video helpful. And in the next video, we will explore how to integrate APIs using resource and RX resource, which were introduced in Angular version 19. And before we wrap up, please like the video, share your comment, and don't forget to subscribe to FED Learning for more useful content. So thanks for your time, and we will meet again in the next video. Until then, keep learning and keep visiting. Thank you. Bye-bye.